For 10 years, I'd been the perfect daughter, the perfect sister. My name is Hazel Carter, and I was the one who paid for everything: the mortgage, the cars, the lavish Christmas gifts. I thought it was my duty. But this holiday season, just as I was drowning in their demands, I received an anonymous email. It held a video file and a simple message: "They think you're a fool." I had no idea that clicking play would expose a betrayal so cold it would burn my entire life to the ground. They called me their workhorse, but they forgot that workhorses can break the plow. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. Of pine was supposed to be comforting, nostalgic, but this year breathing it in felt like inhaling dust. It was early December, and from my modest apartment window, I could see the entire suburban street lit up with excessive twinkling displays of holiday cheer. Inside, the only light came from my laptop screen, the numbers from my corporate job blurring into a headache. The faint sound of a neighbor's party, the muffled bass of a Christmas song just added to the pressure. It was a constant thrumming reminder of what I was supposed to be doing, who I was supposed to be doing it for. My name is Hazel Carter. I'm in my late 20s, and I am, for all intents and purposes, the sole proprietor of my family's comfort. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and I didn't need to look. It would be one of them. My mother Margaret likely forwarding me a link to a ridiculously expensive new china set, just perfect for the Christmas table, a table I would pay for but barely get to sit at. Or my father Daniel sending a passive-aggressive text about the heating bill in their house, the one I paid the mortgage on. Or most likely my younger brother Ethan. At 25, Ethan had mastered the art of weaponized incompetence, a trait he'd inherited from our father and our mother had polished to a high shine. His texts were always urgent, always about money, and always ended with a breezy, "You're the best, sis," as if that digital pat on the head was currency. I'd spent my entire adult life being the best, the responsible one, the rock, the workhorse. It started small in college, covering a phone bill here, a textbook there. But after I landed this high-stress, high-salary job, the expectations metastasized. It became my privilege to pay the mortgage on my parents' oversized house because appearances matter, Hazel. It became my duty to fund Ethan's revolving door of failed projects, not to mention the constant repairs on the car I bought him. Holidays were the worst. The gifts, the trips, the catered dinners, all of it landed on my spreadsheets, a separate secret budget line item labeled family. See, I was drowning in an obligation I had never actually agreed to, but was emotionally blackmailed into accepting every single day. This year I'd entertained a fantasy. A small, selfish, wonderful fantasy. I'd been secretly saving a little on the side just for me. I dreamed of a quiet Christmas, maybe a cabin somewhere remote, just me, a fireplace, and a stack of books. No passive-aggressive comments about the dryness of the turkey. No entitled hands snatching gifts I'd overspent on. Just silence. The guilt was immediate, a physical weight in my chest. How could I even think of abandoning them during the most important time of the year? Margaret's voice was already in my head, dripping with wounded disappointment. "But Hazel, darling, it's Christmas. It's about family." My gaze drifted back to my laptop. I'd been ignoring the new email in my personal inbox for the last hour, but its subject line seemed to glow with a sickly green light. It was from a sender I didn't recognize, just a jumble of letters and numbers. The subject: "Something you need to see. Thanksgiving." My blood went cold. Thanksgiving just 2 weeks ago had been the usual marathon. I'd worked half the day, driven 2 hours to their house, cooked half the meal because Margaret was too stressed to manage, and then fielded endless suggestions about my career, my clothes, and my complete lack of a social life. I'd left exhausted with a fake smile plastered on my face and a $500 catering bill charged to my card for the dishes I didn't have time to make from scratch. What could someone have possibly sent me from that day? My mouse hovered over the message. A part of me wanted to delete it, to send it straight to spam and pour a glass of wine and pretend it never existed. Ignorance was a shield I'd used for years. If I didn't look too closely at the bank transfers, if I didn't listen too hard to the subtext of their love, I could pretend this was normal, that this was just what good daughters do. But another part of me, a small, cold, and unfamiliar part, was curious. It was the same part of me that had started the secret savings account. The part that was so very, very tired. The email preview text was just one sentence. "They think you're a fool. They said so." I stared at it. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. This was a mistake. It was a virus. It was a prank. It couldn't be real. But I knew with a sudden sickening certainty that it was. The dread was a physical thing coiling in my stomach, making my hands shake. But beneath the dread there was something else, a flicker of something. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a desperate primal need to know. My cursor moved from the delete button and drifted slowly, fatally toward the paperclip icon. I clicked. An attachment, a video file, began to download, and I just sat there watching the progress bar fill up, feeling like I was about to either detonate a bomb or finally set myself free. The file finished downloading. For a second, I just stared at the icon, my cursor frozen. My entire life, I'd been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, the one who absorbed the blows. Opening this felt like an act of war, and I wasn't a soldier. I was just tired. But the truth was, I was tired of being tired. I double-clicked. The video player popped open, a black screen reflecting my own pale, anxious face. Then it flickered to life. The audio was clear, too clear, as if the person recording was standing right there. The camera was shaky, filmed from a low angle, maybe from behind a piece of furniture in my parents' living room. It was Thanksgiving night. I'd already left, driven back to my apartment to get a head start on work, a lie they'd all accepted with relieved smiles. The three of them, Margaret, Daniel, and Ethan, were still on the couch, surrounded by the debris of the dinner I'd paid for. They looked relaxed, wine glasses in hand, laughing. "She didn't even blink at the new repair bill," Ethan said, taking a gulp of wine. He was lounging his feet on the coffee table. "Another $800 for the car she bought me. It's almost too easy." My mother, Margaret, let out a high-pitched titter. She fanned herself with a napkin, her face flushed with alcohol and satisfaction. "Why would she, Ethan? She likes paying for us. It makes her feel important, don't you think? All that money from her big fancy job and no one to spend it on but her dear old family." My breath hitched. I pressed a hand to my mouth, the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. "Now, Margaret," my father Daniel said, attempting a tone of reason, but failing, a smirk playing on his lips. "She's a good girl. She knows her duty." He leaned forward, topping off his glass. "Well, let's just hope her holiday bonus is as big as she says it is. Aspen isn't cheap, you know." Aspen. I hadn't heard anything about Aspen. I'd been planning to give them a modest combined cash gift for Christmas, hoping to finally start funding my own escape. "Oh, that bonus is as good as spent, darling," Margaret said, waving her hand dismissively. "I already told her we needed to plan a real family Christmas this year, somewhere special. She won't deny us. She never does. A few tears, a little reminder of how much we've sacrificed for her. She'll write the check." Then came the line that shattered the last bit of my denial. It was Ethan raising his glass in a mock toast. "To Hazel," he slurred, a cruel, lazy smile spreading across his face. "She's the perfect workhorse. Solid. Dependable. All we have to do is crack the whip and she just keeps pulling." They all laughed. My father, my mother, my brother. They toasted. They toasted to the workhorse. The video ended, cutting abruptly to black, but I just sat there. The screen was dark, but the images were burned into my retinas. The sound of their laughter echoed in the silence of my apartment, louder than any holiday music. Shock was the first wave, a cold anesthetic numbness that flooded my veins. This wasn't real. It was a deep fake. It was a prank. It was the truth. It was every doubt I'd ever silenced, every suspicion I'd ever buried under the guise of family. The numbness receded, and what replaced it was something I'd never allowed myself to feel before. It wasn't sadness. It was rage. A cold, sharp, simmering rage that started in my stomach and spread like ice through my limbs. I remembered every manipulation, every emergency that coincided with my payday. Margaret's sudden health scare 2 years ago that resulted in a brand new living room set. Daniel's miscalculation on his taxes that I'd had to zero out. Ethan's endless rotating list of last time I swear requests for rent, for bills, for a little extra that always turned into a four-figure withdrawal. They weren't just ungrateful, they were parasitic. And the word, workhorse. It wasn't just an insult, it was a job description. It was my role. The one they had assigned me, the one I had blindly, stupidly, gratefully accepted, because I thought it was the same thing as being loved. I replayed Ethan's words. All we have to do is crack the whip. I felt the sting of it, a phantom lash across my back. The cracks in my compliance, the little hairline fractures I'd been ignoring, suddenly split wide open, shattering the foundation of the person I thought I was. My vulnerability, the part of me that craved their approval, was still there, cowering in the corner. But the anger was bigger. It was a shield, and it was a weapon. I looked at my laptop at the email. An anonymous sender. Someone had seen this. Someone had watched my humiliation, and for whatever reason decided I deserved to see it too. But that didn't matter. What mattered was Aspen. What mattered was the bonus. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It wasn't just a moment of drunken cruelty. It was premeditated, financial, and ongoing. They weren't just mocking me. They were actively planning to spend my future, a future I had sacrificed everything to build. And in that cold, dark apartment, I realized my quiet solo Christmas cabin wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was a declaration of war. The rage didn't dissipate overnight. It calcified. By the time the weak December sun filtered through my blinds, the chaotic, fiery anger had cooled into something solid, heavy, and incredibly useful: a plan. I didn't go to work sending a curt email blaming a sudden migraine. Instead, I sat at my dining table, my laptop open, and for the first time in my life, I conducted a full financial audit of the black hole that was my family. I pulled up the family spreadsheet I kept, the one that tracked all my support. It looked less like a budget and more like a rap sheet. There it was in crisp, undeniable numbers: the $200 monthly mortgage payment for their house and automatic transfer, the $450 payment for Ethan's car, plus the $200 I'd co-signed for on his insurance, the emergency credit card I'd given my mother, which showed a recent non-emergency $3,000 charge from a luxury travel agency. Aspen. They hadn't even waited for the bonus. They were already spending it. I scrolled further: automatic transfers for their utilities, their high-end cable package, even the grocery delivery service. I wasn't supporting my family. I was funding a lifestyle I couldn't even afford for myself. My hand was steady on the mouse. The part of me that used to tremble with guilt was silent, buried under the ice. I logged into my bank. Click. The automatic mortgage transfer scheduled for 2 days from now was canceled. Click. Ethan's monthly allowance transfer was deleted. Click. The joint savings account I'd set up with my mother, just in case, the one I funded and she'd been dipping into, was frozen. I initiated a transfer of 90% of my liquid assets into a new high-yield savings account at a completely different institution, one they had never heard of. I changed my passwords: bank, email, payroll. I then went to my company's HR portal and rerouted my upcoming direct deposit, including that Aspen bonus, to the new secure account. Finally, I called the credit card company, reported the card lost, and had it permanently canceled. The entire operation took less than 20 minutes. The workhorse had just unhitched the plow. A wave of vertigo hit me so hard I had to grip the table. The silence in the apartment was absolute. This was it. The moment of betrayal. But whose? My mother's voice, the one she used when she was disappointed, echoed in my head. How could you be so cruel? Hazel, after everything we've done for you. My father's pained, passive silence, his greatest weapon. We're family. You don't turn your back on family. The guilt was a conditioned response, a reflex beaten into me since childhood. It was a thick, suffocating fog. This was wrong. This was selfish. This was not what a good daughter did. But then, as clear as day, I heard Ethan's lazy drawl, "All we have to do is crack the whip." The fog vanished, burned away by the cold, clean fire of self-respect. This wasn't cruelty. It was consequences. This wasn't me abandoning them. It was me finally desperately refusing to abandon myself. I was just claiming my own personal freedom, the same freedom my paycheck had been buying for them for years. My work phone buzzed. A message from Sophie, my coworker, and the closest thing I had to a real friend. "You alive, migraine of doom." I typed back a simple, "surviving holiday stress." Sophie was smart, sharp, and had no tolerance for nonsense. She replied almost instantly. "Ugh, tell me about it. My brother is already complaining that the headphones I bought him aren't the right model. Sometimes I think family is just a synonym for ungrateful. Just remember, Hazel, you can't set yourself on fire just to keep them warm." Her words struck me with the force of a physical blow. You can't set yourself on fire to keep them warm. I had been a human bonfire for a decade, and they'd just been complaining about the cold. I remembered being 20, eating instant ramen for a week straight in my dorm because Ethan had called me sobbing about a rent emergency that I later learned was a gambling debt. I'd wired him my entire food budget, and the hunger I'd felt in my stomach had been eclipsed by the pathetic pride of being the responsible one. I'd been so resilient I'd practically made myself indestructible, all so they could keep testing my breaking point. I put my phone down, the last tremor of doubt gone. My initial plan, my fantasy of a quiet cabin, suddenly felt insufficient. It felt like running away. I wasn't going to run. I looked at the canceled credit card confirmation. I thought about the failed mortgage payment notification they would soon receive. I thought about the calls that would soon start, the texts, the accusations. They had a plan for my money. They had a luxurious Christmas in Aspen, all mapped out, funded by the workhorse. A cold, sharp smile touched my lips for the first time in days. Just stopping the money wasn't enough. It wasn't justice. They deserved to feel the full impact of their entitlement. They deserved to see their lazy, comfortable, curated world fall apart. I wasn't just going to stop funding them, I was going to make them feel it. The first few days were a quiet, cold war waged entirely from my apartment. The silence from my side was my new weapon. My first move was to dismantle the holiday they expected. I found the confirmation email for the massive, obscenely expensive catered Christmas Eve dinner Margaret had ordered on my credit card, the one I'd just canceled. I called the caterer, claimed a change of plans, and paid the cancellation fee myself from my new secure account. Then I took the remaining balance and made an anonymous donation to the local food bank, redirecting the entire holiday feast to the downtown women's shelter. Next, I logged into the various online accounts I'd used for years, the ones that held all the shipping addresses. The noise-canceling headphones for Daniel the designer, handbag for Margaret, the new gaming console for Ethan, all of it was canceled. The river of guaranteed holiday luxury had been dammed. I started a new folder on my computer, password-protected evidence. The first item in it was the video. The second was the screenshot of the Aspen travel charge. This file became my anchor. Every time a pang of that old programmed guilt tried to surface, I opened the folder and watched 30 seconds of my family toasting the workhorse. It was a remarkably effective antidote. The first text came on the 5th of the month, the day Ethan's allowance usually hit his account. It was from him. "Hey, did you send the wage?" Not seeing it. I read the text, my thumb hovering over the ignore button. I pressed it. An hour later, "Hazel, need to pay my car bill." Ignore. 2 hours later, "WTF? Answer me. I'm serious." I took a screenshot of the exchange and added it to the folder. My phone, once a digital leash, was now a data gathering tool. The real explosion happened 2 days later when the automatic mortgage payment officially failed. My phone didn't just buzz, it detonated. A barrage of missed calls, one after another. Margaret, Daniel, Margaret, Daniel. Then the voicemails started. I let them pile up, listening to them on speaker. A strange, detached anthropologist studying a tribe I no longer belonged to. "Hazel, darling, what's going on?" Margaret's voice was laced with a tight, fake concern. "The bank called. There seems to be some mistake with the mortgage. It was terribly embarrassing." A pause. "Are you okay? We're so worried about you." The next one was from my father, his first direct call in weeks. He just sighed heavily into the phone. "Hazel, you're stressing your mother out. Whatever little game you're playing, it's not funny. Fix it." But they were amateurs. The true performance began when Ethan's car insurance was canceled for non-payment. His texts became a waterfall of entitlement and rage. "My insurance is canceled. Do you know how much trouble I'm in? I could get my license suspended." Followed by, "I'm telling Mom you're doing this on purpose. You're ruining Christmas." I saved every message. The desperation escalated. Margaret started in with the false crises. "Hazel, your father thinks he's having chest pains. The stress is getting to him. You need to call us right now." I almost wavered, then remembered Daniel's smirk in the video as he talked about Aspen. I called the local non-emergency line in their town, gave the address, and requested a wellness check for a man reporting chest pains. I knew they wouldn't find anything, but I also knew the humiliation of having an ambulance show up would be exquisite. I was documenting everything. Each buzz of my phone was a small jolt of victory, a confirmation that I was finally in control. It wasn't just satisfaction, it was liberation. It was the dizzying, terrifying, exhilarating feeling of testing the air outside my cage. But it wasn't easy. There were moments late at night when the silence of my apartment felt too big. The inner turmoil was real. I'd been trained my entire life to be the fixer. My reflex was to answer, to soothe, to pay, to make the noise stop. I had to physically grip my own hands to stop from texting back, "I'll handle it." I was testing my own limits, pushing past the guilt, and realizing it was just a phantom, a ghost designed to keep me in line. With every ignored call, the ghost faded. On Friday evening, my phone was in the midst of another frantic barrage from Ethan. He had apparently just discovered the canceled headphones when a new text popped up at the top of the screen. It was from an unknown number, the same one I assumed that had sent the original email. I hadn't heard from them since the video. My heart jumped. I opened it. It wasn't a long message. It wasn't a threat or an explanation. It was just 3 words, and they landed with the chilling impact of a slammed door. "They're panicking." Good. My blood ran cold, but this time it was mixed with a strange sense of validation. Someone else was watching. Someone else had seen the injustice. And they were confirming what I already knew: the psychological warfare was working. For a week, I had conducted my war from the sterile safety of my apartment. But the final move required me to be there. Not to talk, not to negotiate, but to witness. It was a cold evening a few days before Christmas, and the sheer volume of frantic, abusive, and pleading texts had finally gone silent in the last 12 hours. This was the eye of the storm. They were waiting. They expected me to crack, to show up with apologies and open checkbooks just in time to save their holiday. I drove to their house, the house I paid for, and parked my car 2 blocks away, walking the rest of the way. The cold air bit at my face, feeling sharp and clean. I still had my key. I let myself in the side door into the laundry room as quiet as a ghost. The house was a mess. Usually Margaret kept it pristine for the holidays, a perfect stage set. Now the entryway table was piled with unopened mail bills I assumed red-stamped and urgent. The faint smell of stale coffee hung in the air. I heard them in the living room, not talking but simmering. The television was on, blaring some cheerful holiday movie, but it was just noise, a thin veneer over the tension. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, just out of sight, and I listened. "She can't just do this," Margaret finally spat. Her voice wasn't sad, it was furious, brittle with indignation. "The travel agency called again, Daniel. We're going to lose the deposit on Aspen." The embarrassment. "To hell with the deposit, Margaret." My father's voice was a low growl I'd never heard directed at anyone but a slow driver. "The mortgage woman. The bank called me at work. Do you know what that feels like? My credit is ruined, all because our daughter decided to have a tantrum." "It's all her fault," Ethan suddenly yelled, and I heard a thud like he'd thrown a controller. "My car is about to be repossessed. My insurance is gone. She ruined my life. What am I supposed to do?" "She'll be here," Margaret said, her voice shifting instantly back to that familiar, manipulative purr. "She's just being dramatic. She wants us to beg. She's probably just outside waiting to be invited in so she can play the martyr. She'll cave. She always caves." That was it. That was the moment. The last flicker of doubt, the last ember of misplaced, conditioned loyalty went cold and dark. They hadn't learned a thing. They weren't sorry. They weren't even worried about me. They were just animals angry that the trough was empty. I stood there in the cold draft from the door, invisible, and I felt the strangest, purest calm I had ever known. It was a complete absence of guilt. It was the peak of my emotional clarity. I wasn't the workhorse anymore. I wasn't the fixer. I was just Hazel. And I was choosing for myself. I didn't react. I acted. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were perfectly steady. I opened our family group chat, a digital monument to their endless demands and my one-word affirmations. The last message was from Ethan, a solid block of capital letters and profanity from 2 days ago. I ignored it. I tapped the paperclip icon. I selected the video file from my evidence folder. The little upload bar filled slowly. I let it. I let the moment stretch. I could hear Margaret starting another complaint, this time about the canceled caterer. Then the video file was ready. I typed a single simple message underneath it. "Since you're all so confused about the mistakes lately, I thought this might clear things up. You were right about one thing, Mom. I'm not coming to Aspen. But you should have a toast for me anyway. You're good at that." I pressed send. A moment of silence. Then from the living room, a symphony. A high-pitched ping from Margaret's phone. A lower bloop from Daniel's. A buzzy vibration from Ethan's. The holiday movie was suddenly the loudest thing in the house. Then total silence. A sharp, indrawn breath, Margaret. What is this?" she whispered. I heard a muffled sound. "Daniel, play that. What is he?" That's our living room," Ethan said, his voice small and confused. "Is that Thanksgiving?" I heard my own voice muffled from the recording. And then I heard Ethan's voice clear as a bell. The perfect workhorse. The silence that followed was heavier, colder, and more complete than any I had ever experienced. It was the sound of discovery, the sound of exposure, the sound of the whip finally irrevocably changing hands. I heard a sound like a gasp or a sob cut short. Who took this?" Daniel whispered, his rage replaced by a sudden panicked chill. I didn't stay to hear the answer. I didn't need to see their faces. Hearing the sound of their hypocrisy being played back to them in their own voices was my triumph. I kept my control. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just delivered the facts. I turned as silently as I'd entered. I walked out the side door, pulling it shut, until I heard the soft final click of the latch. The cold December air hit my face again, but this time I wasn't numb. I was breathing. I walked back to my car, my spine straight, and I didn't look back. I didn't wait for the fallout. I didn't drive past the house again, and I didn't check my phone. The silence in my car on the drive home was a vacuum, and I refused to let their inevitable toxic noise fill it. For the first time, the adrenaline surging through me wasn't from stress or panic. It was the clean, high-octane fuel of survival. I didn't even go back to my apartment. I drove straight to a hotel near the airport, walked into the lobby with just my purse and my laptop, and booked a room. Sitting on the edge of a clean and personal bed, I finally opened my computer. The Aspen plan had been theirs. My mountain cabin fantasy was mine. I typed Jackson Hole into an airline search. The irony was so bitter, it was almost sweet. They wanted a luxury Christmas, and I was about to give one to myself, paid for in full by the workhorse's reclaimed bonus. I booked a first-class ticket for a flight leaving in 5 hours. I booked a suite at a 5-star resort I'd only ever dreamed of. I clicked confirm without flinching. Before I left, I made one last stop at my apartment. I moved like a surgeon. I packed a suitcase not with the drab, sensible clothes of work Hazel, but with the few expensive, comfortable things I'd bought and never had an excuse to wear. I called my building's management, informed them I was leaving for an indefinite family emergency, and put a hard stop on any visitors or maintenance. I changed the code on my door. I put my mail on a permanent hold. I was systematically dismantling every connection, every point of access. I wasn't just pausing my obligations, I was incinerating them. On the flight, I was offered champagne. I drank it. I watched the sprawling, interconnected lights of the city disappear below me, and I felt nothing but relief. The air in Wyoming was different. It was so cold and clean that it hurt to breathe, a sharp, sterile pain that felt like a purification. My suite was all stone and timber, with a massive fireplace and a balcony that overlooked the snow-covered Tetons. The mountains were silent, judgmental, and utterly magnificent. They didn't care about my petty family drama, and I found that profoundly comforting. For 3 days, I didn't speak to another human being outside of ordering room service or booking a spa treatment. I had a 2-hour massage where the therapist worked the decades of responsibility out of my shoulders, knots so deep they felt like part of my skeleton. I read books, real books with paper pages. I took long, solitary walks in the snow, the only sound the crunch of my boots and the occasional call of a raven. I was completely, terrifyingly alone, and it was the happiest I had ever been. In that silence, the years of manipulation and emotional abuse finally had room to surface, not as accusations but as simple facts. I saw the pattern, the way my resilience had been weaponized against me, the way my generosity was just their word for entitlement. I realized I'd been living my life like a support system for a house that was rotten to the foundation, and I'd been terrified that if I stepped away it would collapse. The confrontation, the video, it had just been me finally admitting that the house deserved to fall. The power of a boundary wasn't just in saying no. It was in realizing that I was the only one who had to enforce it, that the people I'd been protecting myself from were the ones who were supposed to be protecting me. On the 4th day, I sat on my balcony wrapped in a blanket, and I called Sophie. She picked up on the second ring. "Hazel, are you dead? I was about to file a missing persons report." I laughed, a real rusty laugh that surprised me. "Not dead," I said, my voice thick. "I'm in Jackson Hole." I told her everything. The video, the canceled accounts, the confrontation in the hallway, the workhorse. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. "Sophie, Hazel Carter," she said, her voice full of a strange, fierce pride. "I always knew you were a badass, but damn, I hope you're toasting them from that 5-star hotel." "I just feel guilty." I admitted, the word tasting like ash. "They're still my family." "No," Sophie said, her voice suddenly sharp and clear, cutting through my fog. They're relatives. A family doesn't do that. A family doesn't use one person as a human shield against reality. Loyalty is supposed to go both ways, Hazel. You didn't just set a boundary. You evacuated a war zone. What you're feeling isn't guilt, it's just the withdrawal. Her words settled over me, a greater comfort than the fireplace or the blanket. She was right. This wasn't a family. It was a hostage situation. And I had just set myself free. I didn't return to my old apartment. The lease was up at the end of the month, and I simply let it run out, paying the final fees from my secure account and arranging for a moving service to clear it out and put my belongings in storage. I came back from Jackson Hole and checked into a luxury extended stay hotel in a part of the city they never visited. It was clean, anonymous, and most importantly, it was not home. It was a way station, a buffer between the life I'd torched and the one I had yet to build. From this sterile high-rise room, I finally built the dam. I set up a new phone number and email address, which I ported over to my work and financial institutions. My old phone, my old email. Those became my observation deck. I created a filter. Any email or text from Margaret or Daniel or Ethan was automatically routed to a folder named Archive. I didn't block them. Blocking felt like a reaction. Archiving felt like a decision. For the first few days, I didn't look. I focused on my job, which was suddenly so much easier when I wasn't also managing 3 other dysfunctional lives. I slept for 8 solid hours. I ate meals that I'd chosen for myself. Then one night, with a glass of wine in hand, I clicked on the archive folder. The digital avalanche was staggering. The sheer volume of messages documented their unraveling better than any spy cam could have. Ethan's were first, a frantic, misspelled tirade. The car had been repossessed from his apartment complex in the middle of the night. He was furious, humiliated, and most tellingly, threatening to sue me for I wasn't sure what. Stealing the car I had paid for, I screenshotted the messages and added them to my evidence folder, which was now less about a future legal battle and more about a personal museum of my liberation. Then Margaret. Her messages were a masterpiece of emotional escalation. They began with wounded guilt. I don't know what we did to deserve this, Hazel. Transition to performative panic. Your father's health is failing, he just sits and stares. You've broken him. And finally, when neither of those worked, devolved into a pathetic, desperate pleading. Just call the bank. Hazel, we can explain the video. It was a joke. A terrible joke. Just fix the mortgage. We'll pay you back, I swear. That last one almost made me laugh. Finally, there was one solitary email from my father. 5 words. You are dead to us. I realized the first time in my life he had ever said something he truly meant. I dragged it to the folder. My watching wasn't just digital. I'm not proud of it, but it was necessary. I did a public records search. The mortgage default was now official, the first step in a foreclosure process that would be public, messy, and for Margaret, a social death sentence. Their appearance of success was the only currency she'd ever cared about, and I had just bankrupted her. I saw Ethan's car, my car listed on a local repossession auction site. These weren't just disrupted plans. This was the free market of consequences. This was the embodiment of the American ideal that my family had always twisted, the one about personal agency. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. My resilience, which they had counted on as a resource, was finally being used for its intended purpose, my survival, not their comfort. I was no longer a person to them, just a utility. And that utility was now finally out of service. Sitting there in the quiet of my hotel room, I felt the last sticky tendrils of guilt fall away. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a workhorse. I was just a person. An autonomous, unmanipulable person who had finally learned to match the price tag on her own self-worth. I had been forged in the fire of their expectations, and I had finally walked out of it, not just unburned, but stronger, harder, and infinitely more valuable to myself. The unraveling would continue, I knew. the house would be lost. Their credit would be shot. They would have to, for the first time in their lives, actually work. And I would watch from a distance and feel nothing but the cold, clean satisfaction of justice. My new phone, buzzed on the table. A number I recognized, one I had actually chosen to save. It was Sophie. The text was short, but it was everything. Heard you were back in civilization. I have a bottle of champagne that's way too expensive for one person, and I'm not taking no for an answer. My place. Tonight. We're celebrating your Independence Day. The extended stay hotel was a necessary cocoon, but it wasn't a life. I spent the next few months in a blur of productivity, severing the last of my old logistical ties and forging new ones. My work performance, now powered by my full, undivided attention, was stellar. I took the promotion I'd been putting off for 2 years, the one I'd told myself I couldn't handle because I had too much on my plate. It turned out my plate had just been piled high with other people's garbage. With the new title and the accompanying raise, I found a new home. It wasn't a house like the one I'd been paying for. It was a sleek, modern condo in the city, high up with a wall of windows that looked out over the skyline, not a suburban street. It was secure, it was comfortable, and it was mine in my name, and my name alone. It's Christmas again, a full year later. The air in my new home smells of real pine from the small, tasteful tree in the corner and the expensive cinnamon candle burning on the coffee table. There are only 2 gifts under the tree, both wrapped in thick velvet ribbon. One is a cashmere robe for me, the kind of indulgent comfort I'd never have allowed myself before. The other is a vintage first edition copy of a book I know Sophie has been hunting for. The joy I felt buying it was clean, simple, and unburdened by obligation. It was a gift given from a place of want, not should. I've learned this past year that no is a complete sentence, but yes, when it's real, is 1,000 times more powerful. My laptop is open on the table, not for a financial audit, but for pleasure. The confirmation page is glowing. Your trip to Italy is booked. For April. A full 3 weeks, starting in Rome and ending in Tuscany. It was the trip I'd been saving for before my family's emergencies became my full-time job. It was the ultimate symbol of my self-fulfillment, a promise I was finally keeping to myself. The workhorse was dead and buried. The woman booking this trip was someone else entirely, someone who understood that resilience didn't mean being an endless resource for other people's consumption. It meant being able to rebuild yourself on your own terms from the ground up. I pour myself a glass of the good wine, the kind I used to think was too much to spend on just myself. I walk to the window, looking down at the city lights twinkling like a grounded constellation. The snow is falling, thick, silent flakes against the glass. It's beautiful, and it's quiet. I raise my glass, the only person in the room, and make a toast. To freedom, I whisper. To boundaries. To self-respect. The words feel solid in my mouth, not just concepts, but tangible things I have earned. I am no longer a victim. I'm not a survivor either, because that implies the war is still raging. I am just in control. My clarity is my shield. My empowerment is the air I breathe. It's not a high, just a steady, calm baseline of knowing my own worth. This evening, I'm preparing for my first real holiday. I'm cooking a simple, delicious meal for myself, and then Sophie is coming over to exchange gifts. We'll drink champagne and talk about our futures. It is a celebration of intentional joy. The contrast to the frantic, performative, and toxic holidays of my past is so profound it's almost staggering. This peace, this choice is the real luxury. I'm independent in a way that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with my own soul. As for the archive folder, it still exists deep in the digital ether of my old account, which I never check. I hear things sometimes through the grapevine of a distant aunt who still emails me. I know the house went into foreclosure. I know my father is working for the first time in 20 years as a greeter at a big box store. I know Ethan is living on a friend's couch. They are shadows, ghosts from a life that is no longer mine. The idea that they might one day try to reconnect to slither back into my life under the guise of an apology no longer frightens me. It doesn't even register as a threat. The door is locked. I am the only one with the key. And I will be the one who decides on my own terms if it ever gets opened. But tonight, the only thing that matters is the snow, the wine, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I am finally home. And with that final toast, Hazel's new life truly began. It's a powerful story of betrayal, and we want to know your thoughts. What would you have done? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. For more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Ashes of Yesterday. We'll see you next time.